Today, we will step into the thrilling world of aviation history as we travel back to visit the unfriendly skies of World War II. Join us on a fascinating journey as we uncover the surprising tales behind 5 of the early American fighter planes of the period. From the modest Brewster Buffalo to the legendary P-40 Warhawk and beyond, get ready to witness the courage, innovation, and sheer determination that characterized the pilots of these remarkable flying machines during the critical early years of World War II. Before we start, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This will ensure you stay updated on all our latest releases. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to have you join our growing community. Thank you. The Brewster Aeronautical Corporation designed the Buffalo in 1937. Brewster's latest airplane was intended to replace the Grumman F4F, an older generation biplane designed in the mid-1930s. The Buffalo was a single-engine, single-seat monoplane fighter aircraft, primarily used during the early stages of World War II. The F2A was an all-metal aircraft made of stress aluminum with flush-riveted panels. It was among the earliest U.S. monoplanes to include an arrestor hook and other specific modifications for aircraft carrier operations. The F2A had a short, broad fuselage and a main landing gear that retracted inward. At the time, it was considered a leading-edge naval fighter plane. Entering service in June 1939, the aircraft underwent several modifications and improvements during its service life. Beyond its adoption by the United States, the Brewster Buffalo found its way into the inventories of several other nations, among them United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, and Finland. In early 1940, Finland received 44 modified F2A-1 Buffaloes. These fighters did not participate in the Winter War, as a peace treaty was signed before they could see any action. However, when Finland joined the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Finnish pilots flying the American airplanes were highly successful against the Soviet Air Force. By the end of the war, the Finnish Air Force produced 36 Buffalo Aces. The top 3 were Hans Wind with 39 air victories, Aino Ilmari with 34, and Jorma Karhunen with 25 confirmed kills. By late 1943, the Finnish Air Force's Buffaloes face reduced effectiveness due to insufficient spare parts, wear and tear, and the presence of superior Soviet fighters and better trained enemy pilots. The British also used the F2As in combat during World War II. In January 1940, due to scarcity of combat aircraft, the British Purchasing Commission was formed specifically to procure American aircraft, aiming to bolster their British inventories and supplement the shortfalls in domestic production. At the time, the American fighter was already considered unfit for duty in Western Europe, but the British were desperately in need of fighter aircraft for the Pacific and Asian theaters of war. Upon the Japanese invasion of northern Malaya on December 8, 1941, the F2As initially demonstrated acceptable performance. When fighting the Japanese Nakajima Ka-27, the Buffaloes could, to some extent, hold their ground, particularly when given time to reach higher altitudes. Initially, the British pilots scored a respectable number of victories. However, the escalating presence of a multitude of Japanese fighters, notably the superior Nakajima Ka-43, eventually overwhelmed the British forces, both in aerial combat and on the ground. During the defense of Burma, the British also used a small number of Buffaloes against the Japanese. Eventually, the F2As were relegated to escorting ground attack airplanes and fulfilling reconnaissance missions. The U.S. Marine Corps operated a group of 20 land-based Brewster Buffaloes and 7 Wildcats during the Battle of Midway. In the early stages of the battle, the American fighters intercepted the first Japanese air raid against Midway. The U.S. pilots downed several Japanese bombers before their escorts engaged the Buffaloes. 13 out of 20 Buffaloes were lost in this action. Consequently, the American phased out the Buffaloes from active duty in the later part of 1942. The remaining airplanes were repurposed for training within the Navy and Marine Corps units. In summary, the Buffaloes served well as a transitional fighter aircraft. However, unlike the more successful F4F Wildcat, the F2A didn't meet the required performance expectations and never gained popularity among the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps pilots. The F2A's shortcomings offered crucial lessons, contributing to the advancement of future American fighter designs. The second airplane in this video is a Curtiss P-36 Hawk. The P-36 had its origins in the late 1930s as a result of a U.S. Army Air Corps competition for a new land fighter aircraft design. The competition aimed to replace existing biplane fighters with more modern monoplane designs. The Curtiss-Wright Corporation, specifically its chief designer, Don Berlin, led the development of the P-36 Hawk. The aircraft evolved from earlier Curtiss Hawk biplanes, drawing inspiration from the company's previous designs. The development and refinement of the P-36 Hawk took place during the mid-1930s, and its first flight occurred in May 1935. The design showcased advancements in aerodynamics, featuring a clean, all-metal monoplane design, retractable landing gear, and an enclosed cockpit. With its Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engine and sleek design, the P-36 Hawk represented a shift in fighter aircraft technology. The Hawk aircraft saw exports to numerous nations. The French Air Force initiated negotiations with Curtiss for the purchase of 300 units. However, due to high costs and delays in deliveries, the initial order was scaled down to only 100 P-36s. Later, more aircraft were ordered to meet the Allies' demands during the initial months of the war. The French Air Force designated the P-36 Hawk as the Curtiss H-75A1. On September 20, 1939, Sergeant André Armand Legren, pilot in the group the Chasse Lafayette, was credited with the first Allied air victory of World War II on the Western Front. On that day, Legren shot down a Messerschmitt Bf-109. During 1939 and 1940, French H-75 pilots claimed 230 air-to-air kills and 81 probable victories in H-75s, against only 29 aircraft lost in aerial combat. Of the 11 French aces of the early part of the war, 7 flew H-75s. The leading ace of the time was Lieutenant Edmond Marin-Lamissely, with 15 confirmed and 5 probable victories. The British Royal Air Force also displayed interest in the aircraft. When the RAF tested the Hawks, it was decided not to purchase them. However, the British came into possession of 229 Hawks by way of shipments diverted from occupied France and aircraft flown by escaping French pilots. The aircraft received the designation Mohawk from the RAF. Although the Hawk was considered obsolete, a number saw service in East Africa, Iran, India, and Burma. After the fall of France, Germany agreed to sell captured Curtiss Hawk fighters to Finland in October 1940. In total, 44 capture aircraft were sold to the Nordic nation. The Finnish Air Force enjoyed success with the P-36s in its continuation war against the Soviet Union. The P-36 crews were credited with 190 kills by 58 Finnish pilots between July 16, 1941, and July 27, 1944, for the loss of 15 of their own. In the U.S., the inaugural P-36A production units reached the 20th Pursuit Group, stationed at Barksdale Field, Louisiana, by April 1938. However, the aircraft encountered several technical issues during its service, hindering its operational effectiveness. Despite efforts to address these challenges, by the time solutions emerged, the P-36 was deemed outdated, leading to its assignment to training units and overseas detachments, including Wheeler Field in Hawaii. The only combat by U.S.-operated P-36s took place during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. 5 of the 39 P-36A Hawks were able to take off during the attack and were credited with shooting down 2 Japanese Mitsubishi A6M20s for the loss of 1 P-36, thereby scoring U.S. aerial victories that were among the first of the Second World War. In conclusion, the Curtiss P-36 Hawks stand as a testament to innovation in the world of aviation. While facing technical challenges and eventual obsolescence, the P-36 play a vital role in shaping the evolution of American fighter airplanes. The next plane on our list is the Bell P-39 Airacobra. The Bell Aircraft Corporation developed this innovative fighter aircraft in the late 1930s. While pilots in many air forces did not favor it, Soviet pilots highly praised the P-39 during World War II. Let's find out why. The P-39 Airacobra was designed in response to a U.S. Army Air Corps proposal for a high-performance pursuit aircraft. Bell Aircraft Corporation's chief designer, Robert Woods, led the development. The Airacobra was an all-metal, single-engine, single-seat monoplane airplane. The aircraft featured several distinctive innovations, including its unconventional mid-engine configuration, a 37mm cannon as its main armament, and a tricycle landing gear. The Airacobra used an Allison V12 engine mounted in the middle of the fuselage, just behind the cockpit, and a propeller driven by a shaft passing beneath the pilot's feet, under the cockpit floor. The main purpose of this unique configuration was to free up space for the 37mm Browning T9 cannon, firing through the center of the propeller hub for optimum accuracy and stability. Entry to the cockpit was through side doors, mounted on both sides of the airplane, rather than a sliding canopy. The P-39 prototype made its maiden flight on April 6, 1938. Soon, it was found to be short on performance at altitude. The lack of a turbocharger was a notable limitation of the aircraft, especially in terms of its high-altitude performance. Additionally, due to its unconventional design, the fuselage lacked the space to accommodate a fuel tank. For that reason, the standard fuel load was housed in the wings. The P-39's operational range remained constrained, even when drop tanks were incorporated, making the aircraft primarily suitable for short-range tactical missions. Despite these shortcomings, the P-39 was considered an effective low-level fighter and in ground attack missions, as the Soviet pilots would demonstrate on the Eastern Front. After concluding its service trials, an initial order of 80 aircraft was placed on August 10, 1939. However, after assessing aerial combat conditions in Europe, it became evident that the first 20 production P-39Cs lacked essential features such as armor and self-sealing tanks, rendering them unsuitable for operational use. Consequently, the remaining 60 aircraft in the order were constructed as P-39Ds, equipped with essential armor, self-sealing tanks, and upgraded armament. These P-39Ds marked the Airacobra's debut in service with the U.S. Army Air Corps units. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, a few P-39s saw action in the Southwest Pacific, and later in the war with the Cactus Air Force, during the crucial Battle of Guadalcanal. Although Japanese fighters outmatched them, the Air Corps' pilots showcased commendable performance in strafing and bombing sorties, proving lethal against Japanese forces attempting to reclaim Henderson Airfield. In the North Pacific, between September and November 1942, pilots from the 57th Fighter Squadron operated P-39s and P-38s from an airstrip constructed in Kulik Bay, established on the desolate Adak Island in Alaska. Their missions involved striking Japanese forces that had invaded the Adu and Kiska Islands within the Aleutians in June 1942. For some time, the P-39s also participated in the North African and Mediterranean theaters of war. In 1940, the British Purchase Commission sought combat aircraft and placed an order for 675 export version of the Bell P-39s. Despite several modifications, the Royal Air Force discovered that the Airacobra's performance fell short of their expectations. The 601 Squadron became the sole British unit to operate the P-39 in Western Europe, receiving its initial 2 aircraft on August 6, 1941. Despite further modifications and training, the RAF decided to discontinue the use of the Airacobras due to a blend of operational issues and distrust among pilots towards its new fighter. By March 1942, the squadron had transitioned to Spitfires. The Airacobras already in the UK, along with the ongoing production batch being shipped from the United States, were diverted to the Soviet Air Force. The Soviet Air Force extensively used the P-39, especially the most improved N and Q models. The Eastern Front's tactical landscape didn't necessitate the high-altitude capabilities essential over the skies of Western Europe. Instead, the prevalent low-speed, low-altitude nature of the aerial combat on the Eastern Front perfectly aligned with the P-39's strengths, including its robust construction, dependable radio equipment, and satisfactory firepower. As a result, the Soviets employed the Airacobra largely in low-altitude, air-to-air combat against a range of German aircraft, such as the Bf-109s, Fw-190s, Ju-87s, and Ju-88s. The United States and the United Kingdom dispatched a staggering sum of 4,719 P-39s to the Soviet Union, constituting over one-third of the fighter aircraft they supplied to the Soviets. Remarkably, this amounted to nearly half of the total P-39's production. The Soviet Airacobra losses in the Eastern Front tallied up to 1,030 aircraft. 5 of the 10 highest-scoring Soviet aces logged the majority of their kills in P-39s. Grigory Rechkolov scored 44 victories in Airacobras during the war. Alexander Porpishkin scored 47 of his 59 victories in P-39s, making him the highest-scoring P-39 fighter pilot of any nation and the highest-scoring Allied fighter pilot using an American fighter. The P-39 found service in several other countries beyond its primary users, including Australia, France, Italy, Poland, and Portugal. In conclusion, the P-39 was a pioneering fighter aircraft. Its innovative design provided multiple lessons for future generations of airplanes. Its legacy remains woven into the fabric of World War II's aerial endeavors. The next aircraft on our list was initially perceived as being at an overwhelming disadvantage compared to other naval fighter planes. Nonetheless, it demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability, ultimately emerging as a robust and effective counterpart against formidable adversaries throughout World War II. In the mid-1930s, the United States Navy set forth specifications for a modern naval fighter, aiming to transition from the prevailing biplane fighters to a contemporary design. Brewster and Grumman submitted proposals. Initially, the Navy opted for the Brewster Buffalo as a winning design. Subsequently, following Brewster's selection, Grumman extensively redesigned the prototype, transforming it into the XF4F3. This design included new wings and tail, along with a supercharged variant of the Pratt & Whitney 1830 twin Wasp radial engine. The successful testing of the new prototype prompted an order for F4F3 production models. The first Wildcats were completed in February 1940. While France had placed an order for these planes, the country fell to the Axis powers before delivery. As a result, the aircraft intended for France were redirected to the British Royal Navy. The British designated this aircraft as a Martlet, marking its debut in action in the North Atlantic theater. The F4F scored its first combat victory on Christmas Day, 1940. That day, a land-based Martlet took down a Junkers Ju-88 bomber over the Scapa Flow naval base. Notably, this marked the first ever combat victory by a US-built fighter serving in the British forces during World War II. The British received roughly 1,200 F4F during the war. The Martlets played a new role in combat operations from the newly introduced escort carriers. In September 1941, 6 Martlets embarked on the HMS Audacity, engaging in highly successful convoy escort missions, downing numerous FW-200 Condor bombers. These engagements marked the initial involvement of the Wildcats in aerial combat at sea. On May 5, 1945, the British launched Operation Judgment, marking the final naval air raid of the war in Europe. 28 Wildcats operating from escort carriers executed an assault on a U-boat depot close to Harstad in Norway. This mission resulted in the sinking of 1 U-boat and 2 German ships, at the cost to the British of 1 Wildcat and 1 Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber. The U.S. Navy officially adopted the F4F on October 1, 1941, naming it the Wildcat. During the early part of the Pacific War, the Wildcat was the only effective carrier-based fighter available to the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps in the Pacific theater. The Wildcats faced a tough challenge against the Japanese A6M0s, which enjoyed superior speed, exceptional agility, and a longer range. This generated significant dissatisfaction among U.S. Navy pilots, primarily due to the Wildcat's performance shortcomings compared to the Zero. These limitations became especially evident during pivotal fights in the battles of the Coral Sea and Midway. Nonetheless, the F4F managed to hold their ground due to their robust construction, heavy armor, and self-sealing fuel tanks. The Wildcat's airframe could endure significantly more damage compared to the unarmored Japanese counterparts. In 1943, more advanced naval fighters, such as the Grumman F6F Hellcat and the Vought F4U Corsair, entered the South Pacific theater. From 1943 until the end of the war, Wildcats equipped with bomb racks were mostly assigned to escorting convoys and secondary missions. Their primary role involved fighting submarines and engaging ground targets. The top Wildcat pilot aces of World War II were Marion Eugene Carl, the third scoring Wildcat ace with 16.5 victories while flying Wildcats, plus an additional 2, flying Vought F4U Corsairs, while in service with Marine Fighter Squadrons 221 and 223. John Lucian Smith was the second scoring Wildcat ace with 19 victories while flying with Marine Fighter Squadron 223 and a recipient of the Medal of Honor. Joe Forrest was the top-scoring Wildcat ace with 26 victories, flying with Marine Fighter Squadron 121 during World War II, and also a recipient of the Medal of Honor. Despite facing fundamental disadvantages, the Grumman F4F Wildcat achieved an impressive 6.9-to-1 kill ratio, a testament to its ruggedness and respectable performance, particularly at high altitudes. The F4F Wildcat remains an example of unwavering heroism in naval aviation history. Its legacy, defined by bravery, innovation, and steadfast service, endures as a testament to the courage of those who piloted and maintained these legendary aircraft. The last airplane on the list is the iconic Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. The P-40 was a single-engine, single-seat, all-metal fighter bomber. The P-40 Warhawk was the third most produced American fighter during World War II, following the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt. Its production concluded in November 1944, after an impressive run that saw an assembly of 13,038 units, a testament to its significance and widespread use during World War II. On October 14, 1938, test pilot Edward Elliott took the prototype XP-40 on its inaugural flight. Throughout the remainder of 1938 and into 1939, Curtiss dedicated their force to enhance the performance of the XP-40. Unfortunately, the liquid-cooled Allison V1710 engine powering the P-40 lacked a two-speed supercharger, which limited the Warhawk's performance at high altitudes. Despite this limitation, the P-40 was a key element for Allied air forces across three major theaters: North Africa, Southwest Pacific, and China. Additionally, the P-40s held a significant role in several other regions, including the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Alaska, and Italy. Its performance at higher altitudes was less critical in these theaters, where it served reasonably well as an air superiority fighter, bomber escort, and fighter bomber. The Warhawk could outmaneuver many of its opponents in North Africa and the Russian front. In the Pacific theater, it struggled against the lightweight A6M0 and the Ki-43 Oscar at lower speeds. However, American pilots quickly adapted, learning to avoid prolonged dogfights with Japanese pilots. The U.S. Army Air Corps initially called the aircraft the P-40 Warhawk, a name officially adopted for all models by Americans after June 1941. Numerous air forces adopted this versatile aircraft throughout World War II, maintaining its frontline presence until the conflict's conclusion. Within the British Commonwealth and Soviet air forces, the versions equivalent to the original P-40, including models B and C, were designated the Tomahawk. The term Kitty Hawk was reserved for models starting from the P-40D and all subsequent variants. Tests conducted by the Royal Air Force revealed that the Warhawk faced performance challenges at high altitude due to its restricted service ceiling. The Spitfires typically operated at altitudes around 30,000 feet or 9,100 meters, while the P-40s performed optimally at 15,000 feet or 4,600 meters and below. The P-40s were deployed in combat with the British Commonwealth squadrons of the Desert Air Force during the Middle East and North African campaigns, starting in June 1941. The British first units to convert were Hawker Hurricane squadrons of the Desert Air Force in mid-1941, as the P-40s were considered superior to the Hurricanes. Notably, No. 112 Squadron of the Royal Air Force became the first Allied aviation group to embrace the iconic sharkmouth insignia adorning the aircraft. The P-40 was generally regarded as roughly equal or marginally superior to the German Bf-109 at low altitudes. The P-40 generally outperformed early Italian fighters like the Fiat G50 and the Mach-E C-200. However, its performance against the Mach-E C-202 raised mixed opinions. Skilled pilots who capitalized on the P-40's strengths proved formidable against the top Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica adversaries. Notably, 46 British Commonwealth pilots achieved ace status in P-40s, among them 7 double aces. The first American volunteer group, also known as the Flying Tigers, consisted of American aviators and ground crews who served within the Chinese Air Force. Claire Chennault, the Flying Tigers leader, trained his pilots to leverage the distinct performance advantages of the P-40. Notably, the Warhawk possessed a higher dive speed than any Japanese fighter aircraft during the early years of the war, allowing it to effectively employ boom and zoom tactics. The Flying Tigers achieved remarkable success. Their accomplishments were extensively publicized by a group of international journalists to bolster public morale back in the United States. As per official records, within a mere 6.5 months, the Flying Tigers destroyed 297 enemy aircraft, while suffering the loss of only 4 of their own in air-to-air combat. The Curtiss P-40s were the first Allied fighters delivered to the USSR through the Lend-Lease Agreement. Between the years 1941 to 1944, the USSR received 247 P-40 BNC, along with 2,178 P-40 B, K, L, and N models. Reports from the Soviet Air Force indicated appreciation for the P-40's standard range and superior fuel capacity compared to most Soviet fighters. However, their preference still leaned towards the P-39 Airacobras. The P-40 saw extensive frontline use in Soviet hands during 1942 and early 1943, particularly in the northern sectors, where it played a pivotal role in the defense of Leningrad. The increased production of superior Soviet fighters, notably the Lavochkin La-5 and later Yakovlev models, led to the gradual replacement of the P-40 in most Soviet Air Force units. During 1942 and part of 1943, the bulk of fighter operations conducted by the U.S. Army Air Force heavily relied on the P-40 and the P-39. During the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the majority of the American fighters in Hawaii were P-40B, many of which were destroyed on the ground. Despite this, a few P-40s successfully took to the skies, engaging Japanese aircraft. Among these, notable pilots like George Welch and Kenneth Taylor managed to shoot down several enemy airplanes. American fighter groups heavily utilized P-40 Warhawks in the Mediterranean and Middle East. While facing substantial losses in the Mediterranean operations, numerous P-40 units achieved commendable kill-to-loss ratios against Axis aircraft. In this theater, 23 U.S. pilots attained ace status while flying the P-40, with the majority of these achievements occurring during the first half of 1943. Despite earning respect from many American officers, more modern aircraft, such as the P-38 Lightning, the P-47 Thunderbolt, and the P-51 Mustang, gradually replaced the P-40. To summarize, the P-40 Warhawk stands as a symbol of adaptability and resilience during challenging times. Despite certain performance limitations, this iconic aircraft left an indelible mark across multiple theaters during World War II. As we conclude our exploration of these remarkable American fighter planes, we're reminded of their profound influence on the early stages of the war. Each aircraft, from the modest Brewster Buffalo to the enduring Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, left an indelible mark on history. Their technological advancements, combat capabilities, and heroic exploits forever shaped the landscape of aerial warfare. We hope you've enjoyed today's video. For those who haven't already, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our upcoming content, ensuring you never miss out on the fascinating narratives we have in store. Thank you for being a part of our community. We look forward to seeing you in our next episodes.